Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Behind the Headlines, and in this programme we will be discussing the results of the US midterm elections that took place last Tuesday. That was the 8th of November. It was a disappointing night for the Republican Party as they expected a red wave to sweep over both houses of Congress, where they were expected to take the House of Representatives and also the Senate. And it looks like, as a recording of this programme, that they have not taken the Senate. But they've won the House of Representatives. This is the best election night for any incumbent in office since 2002, the days of George W. Bush. So President Biden, his administration, will see that election result a success for the Democrats. And we'll also be asking, has the midterm elections results derailed President Trump or former President Trump's bid to win the 2024 presidential election? Reagan, it's great to be doing a programme, particularly on this fascinating topic of US politics. And thanks to you and Alistair Scott, did a great job last week of covering the Israeli elections in my absence. But it's good to be back and discussing the very dramatic political drama that's unfolding the other side of the Atlantic in your home nation, the United States.
Home state as well. Honestly, Simon, this year has gone by. It feels like just the beginning of the year when we were talking about how big a story this would be. We were already projecting and thinking through what might happen, and certainly there was this idea, very widespread, of a red wave wherein the Republican Party would, due to many factors, not the least of which is a horrible economy, recover a lot of ground lost in the previous presidential election. That's not happened. Whatever the final results and votes are still being tallied. I mean, even in the Senate, at the moment, the official tally is 49 to the GOP, the Republican Party, and 48 to the Democrats. 51 is needed for a majority. At the same time, well, that's the official count at the moment. You're quite right that the Senate has already been called for the Democrats. So that indicates that where there are remaining votes, paths for victory for the Republican challengers would be looking very, very slim. It's possible, but very, very, very slim. And certainly not that red wave that was being promised. I think it's not an exaggeration to say, or dishonest to say, by very many Republicans. And at the same time, I saw a headline where the political pundit and ultra-left-wing filmmaker Michael Moore said that he was very confident this was going to be a blue tsunami. It's not really been that either. It's been very, very even. It's been very, very hard fought, and as we'll see in the program tonight, this actually could come back. What seems to be and what's been called a victory in some ways for the Democrats could actually be a poison chalice. Absolutely,
which we'll get on to talk about later. But what's interesting as well is the US midterm elections. So for our viewers that are based in the UK or the rest around the world who don't know too much about US politics, the American executive is divided into three parts. One, you have the presidency, which is currently occupied by Joe Biden for the Democrats. And then you have the lower house, which is the House of Representatives, which elect representatives for Congress, and also the Senate, which is the upper house of the American legislative chamber. And what's so great about the US political system is that it was based and founded upon the principle that man's heart is essentially evil and wicked. Therefore, if you give man too much power, he will abuse it. And this is why we have a perfect example of checks and balances. So it's very rare that a president, which Joe Biden did have control of the House of Representatives, the Senate and the presidency, but it's all meant to bring about checks and balances. Now, usually we have midterm elections every 2 years. And part of the midterm elections is a referendum on the presidency of any going administration. So this is an opportunity in the 4-year election cycle of the United States to actually reflect upon how the American voters and electorate feel about how they are being governed. So this is why it's come out as an interesting result. It's come out with a few surprises. I think the biggest disappointment, I think, for the Republicans is that they were expected to take both houses, both the House of Representatives and the Senate. Of course, had they taken both houses, Joe Biden would have been a lame duck president by now. He wouldn't have any power to push through any of his legislative agenda. The Republicans could then start to face inquiries against his administration and make life extremely difficult for the Democrats. But now that's not likely to take place. But it does mean that the Republicans have now control over the House of Representatives or have influence on the lower chamber of Congress to have influence there, but they don't have the influence in the Senate. And of course, we also know that the Vice President Kamala Harris has a vote in the Senate if there's a deadlock in terms of legislators. So it very much backs and supports what would seem to be a successful night for President Joe Biden, and no one really thought that that was coming.
Yeah, and again, there's still some stuff that can change. I do believe the elections, while voting systems in the states are open to fraud or tampering, as any election, as anywhere is open to that. And certainly I think there does need to be some reform in how these elections are carried out. We've talked a little bit about mail-in ballots and the sort, and bizarre, I had forgotten, was only recently, the past week or so, made aware that you can call up the local ballot counting place and make sure that your ballot has been tallied in the way that you want it. So that's open to abuse as well. They call it curing. You can call and just make sure that it was legible. So how many people could do that and in some way fiddle the system? In some cases, you have individuals who they will be counting the ballots, and if there is a discrepancy, it's down to them to correctly adjudicate what the voter was intending to do on a ballot where it's less than clear. Now, in our country, here in the UK, what happens when that happens, I mean, I went in 2019 to the Islington vote count. If there's any discrepancy, if there's any question, that ballot is spoiled. You do not count it. You do not say it's for this party or that party. It's not down to you. You just scrap it. But in the States, it's a bit different. Yeah. So definitely, there's still a runoff in Georgia. That'll be interesting to see. I was too close to call, so maybe they can get a higher voter turnout and see a majority go over to the Republicans there. It is historically a real swing state that does favor generally the Republicans. If we do a breakdown, at the moment in the House of Representatives, 217 to 205 in favor of the Republicans. 218 is needed for a majority, and they're almost certain to get that.
Yep.
Absolutely. And then for the role of governor, which is it's significant on a local level. This is also decided by the midterms. It's very even. 25 GOP, 24 Democrat. So, and then there's still a couple of those that are left to call. But still, you look at that and you think, okay, this is showing a real polarity in U.S. politics at the moment, a real split between Republican states and Democratic states.
Which is what we're seeing across the Western world right now. We're seeing in our own nation here in Britain and also in the States as well. So, I mean, I think Joe Biden said this was the most successful night for any Democratic presidency in 40 years. Certainly the best result for an incumbent since 2002, when George W. Bush did well in the midterm elections straight in the aftermath of 9/11. So that's a 20 years where we've seen the ruling party actually do very well in the midterm elections. But what was surprising most is really the discontent shown by the American electorate for the rising food prices, the inflation being out of control, rising prices of energy, plus also Joe Biden had 40% presidential ratings, which is extremely low for a serving president, and combined that he presided over a disastrous US foreign policy as well. You would have thought that the American electorate would send a very powerful message to the White House to get their act together. Obviously that didn't materialize, and we can also talk that through. We also see that many senior Republicans now are blaming Trump for the reasons why the Republicans didn't win both houses of Congress, primarily because they're saying that former President Trump, and who wants to announce his candidacy for the 2024 presidential election, made it all about him when it should have been a referendum on Joe Biden. And of course, one of the big successes for the Republican Party was the success of Ron DeSantis in Florida, winning by over 20% over his Democratic rival, which has really spearheaded his presidential bid for 2024. So looks really interesting. But why do you think the Republicans are actually blaming former President Donald Trump for their poor showing in the election results?
What viewers need to remember is that former President Donald Trump has historically not been a Republican. Historically, he was always a Democrat, right? He then, I think there has been a measure of genuine change in some of his political viewpoints and perspectives. But at the end of the day, as he manifested on several occasions, regardless of all of the positives that were achieved during his tenure, which we've discussed, Trump was very regularly making things about himself, and that's what he's done here. I'm sad to say he's once again tried to make the midterms about himself, to the point that Ron DeSantis, who should be one of his allies, who should be someone who he sees as ideologically, we're fighting on the same team. He bizarrely referred to as Ron DeSanctimonious, and he does his normal Trump routine of mocking and mimicking his opponents. DeSantis won in Florida. He's not responded to Trump. He's not entered a war of words or anything, which has actually served him well. But after DeSantis, as you rightly said, his 20% plus victory, Trump, rather than congratulating, tried to highlight that he had a lower number of votes than Trump had procured for his presidency in Florida. And he tried to make the point that this shows that the people of Florida actually prefer Trump over DeSantis. But actually this shot Trump in the foot, because there's significantly lower voter turnout during midterm elections. And if you take the percentage of those who turned out for the presidential election and the percentage of those who turned out for the midterm election, and you look at both of those, and you look at proportion and percentages, DeSantis beats Trump quite handily. So, yes, he had fewer votes, but far fewer people turned out.
And also we see that the candidates that were running for the Senate and the Congress that were actually publicly endorsed by Donald Trump suffered at the hands of the US electorate, didn't they? So they didn't get that endorsement by the US electorate who rejected them. So that means that there's something wrong with the Trump brand.
Yes.
It shows that his supporters are very loyal and very passionate to him, but he's not able to move into that middle ground to win those key states that are needed in the midterm elections, to win the midterm elections, but also then to 2 years' time to actually win the presidency, which he will actually need to win those college states in order to, if he wants to fulfill his ambition again of being president in 2024.
He's alienated too many people in the Republican Party. Think of his horrendous comments about John McCain several years ago. John McCain, beloved hero in Arizona. Trump sees fit to back Kari Lake for governor Arizona, and she has very much a Trump-esque brand, very heavy on electoral fraud. If something doesn't go her way, it's not that it just didn't go her way, it's that there's a mistake somewhere. No one likes a sore loser. Even if we love sport, okay, something doesn't always go your way, and sometimes that's unjust. Sometimes there is a mistake. Sometimes something is done in the wrong way. But you have to learn to deal with those disappointments with an attitude of humility and grace, or else you're going to lose support. She was, for the past week, tweeting, sending out messages talking about how she knew she was going to win. There was a clear path of victory. There were so many ballots that hadn't been voted, and she knew that most of those would be for her. And now it's emerged that, okay, yes, she gained some ground, but it wasn't enough. And so now she is using some coarse language and stuff, saying that Arizonans know that this is that there's something going on here that's dodgy. That's not how one should deal with an election.
Absolutely, and also it's interesting to note that Democrats actually flipped a Republican seat held and contested by a Trump-supporting candidate in Washington, D.C. So let's have a look at the one of the latest CBN news reports looking at the midterm election results and what it means for Republicans and Democrats.
Members of the upcoming 118th Congress are arriving in Washington to an uncertain post-election landscape, with control of the House still undecided and party leadership in flux. Republicans are expected to win the 6 seats needed to capture the House majority. But Democratic Senate wins in Arizona and Nevada keeps the Senate under Democratic control, with some calling the election results a rejection of GOP extremism.
This election, Nevadans rejected the far-right politicians working to divide us.
I'm incredibly pleased by the turnout. And I think it's a reflection of the quality of our candidates.
Republicans are trying to figure out how, despite one of the worst economies in decades and one of the most unpopular presidents in recent times, the predicted red wave fizzled. Now begins the finger-pointing among Republicans and the scramble for party leadership. Some blame Trump-backed candidates losing as the reason for Republican losses, and some blame Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell.
There's probably a greater likelihood the House flips than the Senate. Candidate quality has a lot to do with the outcome.
Republican Senator Bill Cassidy, who voted to impeach former President Trump, says he supports Senator Mitch McConnell to continue as leader.
We have to be a party about the future. And so if we're talking about the future, the American voter, she'll make her choice.
Party of the future is another way of saying no more Donald Trump in 2024. Meanwhile, Republicans are still hoping to flip Georgia's Senate seat in a December runoff.
The most important thing we can do is elect Herschel Walker to make sure that we can keep the pressure on Democrats in the Senate.
Even if Walker wins, Vice President Kamala Harris will still cast the deciding vote. In the House, some are questioning whether Republican Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has enough support to become Speaker. In a scenario deemed unthinkable just a week ago, Speaker Nancy Pelosi is still hoping for a miracle that would allow her to retain her post.
We don't pray for a victory. I grew up in a political family. You don't pray for the victory, but you pray that God's will be done.
Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump is still expected to formally announce his 2024 presidential run Tuesday night, even though some are calling on him to wait. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
And that's the latest news report from CBN on the US midterm elections. Now, according to the Daily Telegraph, Republican power brokers are now moving into the DeSantis camp after he crushed his Democratic challenger by over 20%, and that was seen as a massive landslide victory for the governor in Florida. We've also seen a recent poll of 41 Republican voters wanted DeSantis to play to become the party's presidential nominee, and that's 2% more than Donald Trump, and also believe that Trump has a weak standing with the Republican establishment, but has very strong support from the party's base. And it's interesting how actually I'm a big fan of Victor David Hanson, who's an American military historian and columnist, and his articles and his interviews and his insight is superb. So he's written a very interesting article called Tuesday's Takeaway, and he expresses some of the reasons why the US electorate didn't vote for the Republican Party as expected. So firstly, he says that during the COVID lockdowns, the American elections radically changed to mail-in and early voting. They did so in a wide variety of state-by-state ways and ranked voting and required majority margin to the mess and the results that is once cherished election day. Balloting becomes increasingly irrelevant. He says election night no longer exists. Returns are not counted for days. It is intolerable for a modern democracy to wait for all sorts of different ballots, both cast and counted under radically different and sometimes dubious conditions. He says the Democrats, with overwhelming media and money advantages, have mastered these arts of massive and unprecedented early mail-in absentee voting. Old-fashioned Republicans count on rallying up their voters to show up on the election day, and it's far easier to finance and control the mail-in ballots than to get out the vote. And it makes an interesting point that America is the world's greatest democracy in the world, and yet American democracy is seen to be in shambles, particularly the American electorate system. How is it, and how have the Americans allowed this to take place, that you can actually vote for your candidate, whether it's in the midterm elections for your senator or your congressman or congresswoman, or your choice to be president, and that vote can come in days or weeks after even the official even polling day's done. So this is what makes a whole mess. And now, for example, I was listening to a very good report on Fox News last week saying how under the times of Abraham Lincoln, it took 5 days to get the full midterm election results. And here we are in 2021 with all the latest technology and scientific innovation is now taking longer than it did over 100 years ago to actually get the results in for the midterm elections. And how is it that you're able to vote days after the polling day and send it in by ballot, and that's still to be valid? It doesn't make any sense.
There definitely needs to be reform. One of the ways in which Biden has, I think, managed to pull off at least a surprising performance, whether you call it a victory or not, is up for debate, definitely. But he did manage to fire up the support base. They managed to get people out to vote. And unfortunately, the Republicans couldn't match that. It's difficult increasingly to motivate people to see the importance of this. I think Biden did a much, much better job of motivating the Democrat support base. He viciously attacked conservatives, painting them as semi-fascists, and we've talked about the recent rhetoric taking people with views that are very simply traditional Judeo-Christian ethical views as far right. So painting those individuals as far right is exactly as dangers to society, as threats to democracy. Those sorts of inflammatory comments definitely will fire up people to maybe even those sitting on the fence to see, okay, I might not support all of Biden's policies, but I don't want that to happen. I don't want to be thought of as one of those people. And so I'm going to vote for my Democrat representatives. And it is a reflection on Biden. It is actually a reflection on how he's managed to maneuver and steer this election. It shows surprisingly great political prowess. The article.
I think it's probably more on the Democratic strategist rather than Biden himself, to be honest, Luke. So I wouldn't give Biden that much credit.
Exactly, but he's obviously the front man, giving the speeches and stuff. Even that dreadful speech that was even on left-wing outlets being pictured in this particular way as dark, ominous, red background,
dystopian.
Very dystopian silhouettes and imagery in the photographs of that occasion. The left seeing that as well, saying this is just completely out. It manipulated enough minds to impact this election.
Obviously, weren't watching our edition of Behind the Headlines. Yeah. If they were, they would have thought differently.
Well, yeah, exactly, because we exactly exposed that and talked about it. But Biden goaded young people to vote by temporarily lowering gas prices through draining the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. He's offered amnesty for marijuana offenses. I still have quite a few contacts in the United States, and seeing the erosion of understanding of this is actually quite serious. I know people in Portland who live in Portland, and they see on a daily basis this is damaging. We've had talks here about reclassifying marijuana, and we've chosen not to do that because there is enough evidence that shows this can damage. Well, he's offered amnesty for marijuana offenses. He's canceled $500 billion of student loan debt. He told young women that they would die without unlimited abortions. They have access to that. So the Supreme Court, they're the bad guys now. This is very dangerous because that's undermining a very core part of the United States democratic process. The Supreme Court is the highest court in the nation. Any decisions, any discrepancies regarding those decisions ultimately find their way to the Supreme Court and its justices. So to undermine the authority of the Supreme Court, as Biden has done, is a very undemocratic move, but it has garnered extra support for him, and one can be certain that Planned Parenthood and similar groups have rallied their troops to get out in support for Biden on this occasion.
Absolutely. And also, another fact is that the Republicans assume that all voters, red and blue, would sensibly care about the spiking inflation, unaffordable food and fuel, an open border, and a disastrous foreign policy. But Americans do worry, but also demand concrete solutions, as they often did not hear from even the insightful critics of Biden's ruinous agenda. So Victor Hansen also makes an interesting point. He says, moreover, in the last days of the election, Biden and the media effectively smothered those existential issues by claiming the country was threatened by insurrectionists and pro-life fanatics, stopping to the claim that the attack of Paul Pelosi, a crazed homeless man, a nudist, and illegal alien, was the inevitable tip of the supposed MAGA, that's Make America Great Again, insurrectionary spear proved to be effective. And of course, I remember that in the run-up, it was all about this, that these MAGA Republicans are the big threat to democracy. They support pro-life extremists. They're against democracy. They want to overthrow our democratic system, and are certainly painting them as extremists, as a far right with Trump as well. Obviously, then did play a major role in how the US electorate perceived the elections. But also, I think we have to kind of take a step back, I think, Reagan, and look at the role that the US media played in this election. I mean, for example, if, the media played its natural role or its God-given role of scrutinizing the government of the day, and if the US liberal media focused as much scrutiny as they did when President Trump was in power, then there's no way that Biden would have done very well. I mean, he struggles to even put a conversation together or string a few sentences together. Sometimes doesn't even know how to get off the own stage. He slips up when walking up to Air Force One. And you know that he's not in the mental state to become president. So where is the US media to actually call him out and to actually say, is this man well enough, fit enough, and young enough to be president. But if this was Trump, then he would be under a microscope. Yes. Every action, every word he said would be under a microscope. Every action he did would be under a microscope. And yet we're not seeing that with Biden. What we're seeing is that the liberal media are rallying behind the Democrats and painting the other side as extremists, insurrectionists, and crazy pro-lifers, which is a distortion of the truth. And also, we know that our politics is less about policy now, and it's more about character and character assassinations and character politics, rather than looking at the content and say, well, this is this government. How is this government doing in terms of its policy? How is it actually governing? How is this making America safe? How is this actually improving the lives of ordinary Americans? You know, that media analysis and scrutiny sadly is gone in the 21st century.
Yeah, and one of the things that we need to realize when it comes to the midterms here, definitely the lack of focus, the lack of transparency in dealing with some of the scandals related to Biden, whether real or manufactured, it just was not equivalent to what happened when it came to Trump. When it came to Trump, we had a situation, whether real or manufactured, anything that was said, anything that made him stink more was applied. And it's just not happened in the same way, though there has been news, though there have been many reports of indiscretions and of potential scandal and bad behavior on Biden's part. It's not stuck in the same way, and there's been a minimizing of its significance. Now, one of the issues that we can't ignore is the impact that Trump has had on the midterm election. There have been people who said he's now essentially lost 3 elections, the midterms of his tenure, and that's normal. Here's the reality: it's normal to lose the midterm election. So the opposing party normally wins the midterm election, which is why in this case it is a blow to the Republicans that there wasn't a red wave. It is, although this could damage Biden. It's still a blow, but he lost the midterms of his tenure. He lost the presidency.
2018,
now his candidates have essentially lost, in most cases, their midterm elections. And so this is a referendum to some degree on Biden. It's also a referendum on Trump. Mike Pence has announced that he's going to be running he's expected to run in 2024, which will be interesting to see. The date of our recording of this program, President Trump is expected to make some announcement. But again, he's making a lot of this about himself. He's demeaning other Republicans, continuing to alienate and point the finger in various places. Even when, Arizona, as we've already mentioned, he lost Arizona.
Absolutely.
A state that will not vote for him because of his treatment of one of its biggest heroes, John McCain. It's just not going to happen.
Of course, John McCain was a war hero as well, caught by the Vietnam War as well, and suffered badly from that, under being tortured and stuff as well. So, and then to become a kind of political hero as well. But I think we also have to mention the fact as well that all President Trump had to do, which is pretty much impossible, is to remain quiet for a couple of weeks, not getting to focus about himself, whether he was going to stand in 2024. But he saw that he consolidated a hold over the Republican Party, that he felt that he was in the prime position to stand for the 2024 and win the party's nomination to become their nominee for their presidential candidate for the 2024 election. Now, how much do you think if it is a blow that Mike Pence now has spoken out for the first time on what happened on January the 6th? And in his first TV network interview since the insurrection, Mr. Trump's former vice president told ABC News that he was angered by Mr. Trump's tweet at the Capitol Hill insurrection unfolded on the 21st of January, on the 6th of January, and that accused him of lacking the courage to refuse to clarify Joe Biden's electoral victory. He said, the president's words were reckless. It was clear he decided to be part of the problem, he said. the president's words that day at the rally before the riot endangered me and my family and everyone at the Capitol building. Mr. Pence had to be rushed to safety as the mob storms the Capitol. He said, I turned to my daughter who was standing nearby and I said, it doesn't take courage to break the law, it takes courage to uphold the law. And Mike Pence is to release his memoirs this week, actually. It's called So Help Me God, about his time in office. Now, I trust Mike Pence more because I know that he's a born-again believer. He has integrity. And as vice president, he showed that integrity in the White House serving under President Trump. So for the first time for him to come out and publicly and say that Trump's actions were reckless is a clear departure from his involvement in the Trump administration. So it very much looks like the Trump brand now has become toxic. I think the American electorate has said we've had enough of Trump now. And of course, this gives an opportunity, doesn't it, for the Republicans to push forward Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, who won a 20% a victory in Florida. So can you share with us who a little bit more on Ron DeSantis?
Yeah, so relatively young, politically speaking, 1978, September 14th is his day of birth, born in Jacksonville, Florida. So he's a Florida native. He serves as governor of Florida. He has been re-elected in quite a convincing fashion, as you've already said, and previously was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. His early life education and military service sees him as the eldest of two children born to Karen DeSantis, a nurse, and Ronald Daniel DeSantis, an installer of Nielsen TV ratings boxes. So hardworking American family by all accounts. From a young age, Ron DeSantis was a standout baseball player, earning distinction as both a third baseman and a pitcher, and in 1991 helping his Little League team to qualify for the Little League World Series, which is it's a big deal in the States. Might not mean much to UK viewers, but it is a big deal. They lost that in the quarterfinals. He continued to play baseball, attended Yale University. He captained the varsity team. After graduating in 2001 with a history degree, he briefly worked as a teacher at a prep school before he went on to study law at Harvard. During that time, joined the U.S. Navy and became an officer in the Judge Advocate General Corps. His service included a stint at the naval base in Guantanamo Bay, which of course at that time was a very, very critical spot where terrorists or those suspected of terrorism were being held. It's a notable detention facility. He was deployed to Iraq, where he was a legal advisor to a Navy SEAL commander, and his commendations include a Bronze Star for meritorious service. In 2010, he left active duty, but remained in the U.S. Naval Reserves, and in that year married Casey Black, a TV reporter and local news anchor with whom he has 3 children. After that phase of his life and career, he worked as a federal prosecutor, has published a book, Dreams of Our Founding Fathers, First Principles in the Age of Obama, in which he described his brand of conservatism. And this is where we see the DeSantis brand, so to speak, begin to emerge and beginning to be revealed in its structure. He criticizes in that volume some of the policies of the then President Barack Obama, and the following year ran for a seat in the House of Representatives, easily elected to that, representing District 6 in northeastern Florida. Now, while he was while he was in the House of Representatives, he co-founded in 2015 the conservative House Freedom Caucus and became a frequent commentator on Fox News. That's where he began to gain some of his popularity and notoriety. He was backed by the conservative populist movement. Seems to have fizzled out a little bit now, but the Tea Party movement. He announced his bid for the Senate in 2015, but then withdrew after Marco Rubio, Republican, decided to seek re-election. Now, 2017, Trump becomes president. DeSantis was one of his most vocal supporters, making it all the more jarring that one of his most vocal supporters, being one of Trump's most vocal supporters in that election, Trump is now speaking in a very demeaning way to him and of him. He supported Trump's massive tax reform bill and unsuccessful effort to replace the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act.
No, absolutely. So we could see him as the candidate. I think that the Republican establishment will want to push forward.
Yeah.
But we know with Donald Trump that you never say never with him. You never write him off. I think he represents a movement rather than actually a political party. But, you know, again, God is sovereign. But we have to turn our attentions to the Democrats. On Sunday, I read this excellent article here in the Sunday Times. Brilliant article by Justin Webb saying the winner's curse, an election triumph that the Democrats really didn't need. And so what Justin Webb is talking about is how the Democrats are having success in maintaining control of the Senate and doing reasonably well in the midterms, not having a kind of red wave or Republican control of both houses of Congress, as was expected, has turned out to be a curse for the Republican Party. And the main point he makes, which is really interesting, he's saying that, and I'm going to read a quote from his article. He said, "It would have been so much easier to lose. Biden would have been toast. The mainly white, university-educated progressives whose occupations dominate discussion of the party could have been blamed for causing the defeat, and eased out of the Democrat mainstream party could have been its battles about policing and crime and various other kind of social issues that preoccupy the Democrat Party. But they have a big problem now ahead of the 2024 elections, because if Biden had done badly and there was a huge majority for the Republicans in both houses of Congress, this would have been the end of Joe Biden. The Democrats would have brought an alternative presidential candidates to stand in 2024, and now they can't. And it's also interesting that Joe Biden will be 86 in 2 years' time, the next presidential election, and the Republican Party are stuffed. The Democrat Party are stuffed. They either support him, knowing there's no way that he can carry out a second term at the age of 86, which only leaves Kamala Harris to become president, and she's certainly extremely unpopular, far more unpopular than Biden, so she wouldn't be able to win an election in her own right, and wouldn't be able to mobilise the Democrat support base. So there's major problems, I think, for the Democrats, which does set things up nicely to think that this result actually favours the Republican Party. The Republican Party are in a much better position, having not won both houses of representatives, but because they know that Biden will be the Democratic candidate going in for re-election in 2024.
Well, it's not great when half of your own party's membership want a new leader. It's not a very confident ground on which to stand. And 2/3 of Americans, polling has found, do not want Biden to be the next president. So we could be looking at a situation where Biden does run and there's a landslide victory against him. We could be looking at a situation where they decide to go for Kamala Harris, but she's deeply unpopular. The likelihood and the optics of having someone else outside of the current arrangement running and campaigning on the Democratic platform while a member of their party is still in situation. I'm not certain that we've seen that before. I'm not certain that we've had a situation where a sitting president, first-term president, doesn't run. His vice president is deemed too unpopular to run, so someone else spends a year campaigning while a member of their party is still president.
I can't see it working.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So we could be looking at a situation where there is a landslide victory for the Republicans. But Simon, being fully transparent here, Trump needs to get hands off. He does not need to run in this. I think my concern is if he runs, the primaries will have another situation where votes are carved up and split, and we either get Trump again, and he will not win. He won't. He can't win historically Republican states because of the alienation. He's in danger. I think he could be in danger of losing Florida, which is always a swing state. It's never a given that you can, as a Republican, win Florida in the presidential election.
I think that's changed now, Florida. This is because you're having so many Americans move away from California,
right,
move away from Texas, living in Florida. So
because
it's become a very, because it's become more of a conservative state.
If he's insulted DeSantis.
Yeah. Well, the other factor as well is in this one as well is that Trump can only win 4 years. He's already served 4 years in office. He can only do another 4. So that puts the Republican Party at such a big disadvantage come 2028. His age, he's not a spring chicken as well. He's getting older. And maybe it's time that he showed a bit more respect for the Republican Party and allowed Ron DeSantis to kind of move forward. So let's have a look at a new aspect on this one. And could actually the midterm elections result actually show something different that's taking place in the United States, a political and spiritual sea change as we move away from our Judeo-Christian heritage. So let's have a look at this excellent CBN News report.
Late last month, we talked to pollster George Barna, who shared his findings about the issues on the minds of Americans as they prepared to vote. Of course, the economy, inflation, and crime topped the list of concerns, but where do Americans get their moral code, the beliefs that motivate them and influence their approach to life? Barna, director of research for the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University, also polled on that. Here's what he found. Barna discovered that 71% of American adults believe in traditional morality, but they differ on the source of those values, where they come from. 42% said morality comes from the individual, what's felt in your heart. 29% said morality should be based on majority rule. The same percentage, 29%, said we should look to the Bible for moral guidance. What a concept. Barna suggests the findings are astonishing and actually mean that 71% of American adults now contend that man, rather than God, should determine right and wrong. Among the majority of those who said morality comes from people, 53% said emotions are the determinant of right and wrong. Folks, when we turn away from the Bible as our guidebook for society and replace it with government and emotions determining our moral code, our nation is in grave danger. Think Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. The traditional source for that nation's moral code, the Bible, was replaced by the principles stated in Mein Kampf and was advanced by government, the Third Reich. And we all know what happened as a result. Jews were demonized, placed in concentration camps, and 6 million were killed. Yes, when we base our morality on the changing values and emotions of the time and not on the unchanging, unmoving Word of God, we in America can easily be persuaded to proceed along the path leading to our own destruction. It's already happening. Caught up in pre-election emotion and campaign rhetoric in the aftermath of the recent U.S. Supreme Court abortion ruling, voters in Michigan, California, and Vermont codified abortion rights in their state's constitution. But isn't that democracy? The people decide what's best for them in their states instead of the federal government imposing its will? Sure, but there are also consequences to individuals determining their own morality. You see, the last time I checked, the moral code given to us in the Ten Commandments still states, "Thou shalt not kill." That includes unborn babies. We've killed more than 60 million of them since 1973. And then we wonder why we're facing a labor shortage and why the nation is not as prosperous and blessed as before. So what else happens when we go down this path of determining our own morality based on emotions? We release criminals on cashless bail. They go out and commit more crimes, all because we feel they're victims of society. We also allow children to be butchered and physically transformed forever in gender-altering surgery. And we allow millions of migrants to flood into the country because we feel they have a right to be here, maybe even vote without becoming citizens. You get my drift? Alexis de Tocqueville is often quoted as saying, "America is great because it is good. If America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great." All good things come from our Creator. If we continue down this path and look to ourselves, our emotions, and government for moral guidance instead of God, we will cease to be blessed and great. Well, that's it today from the Global Lane. Be sure to follow us on the CBN News and NRB channels, social media, and our broadcast affiliates. And until next time, be blessed.
Excellent news report there by Gary Lane. And I think really that this is really, I think, at the heart of why the Republicans didn't do as well as they expected to. And it's the fact that American society is moving away from its Judeo-Christian heritage. And we saw in that excellent news report that the majority of Americans now think that it's not the Bible that gives them their moral code, it's their feelings or what they think is right in their own eyes. And the reason I think also that we are covering this topic tonight on Behind the Headlines is because America is the last bastion of our Judeo-Christian heritage in the West. And if the light goes out on the States, then it goes out across the world. And the United States has been a beacon of freedom and liberty for centuries now. And we know that what's made America great is the Bible-believing Christians, the power of the pulpit, and how God has raised up this nation that used to be part of a colony of the British Empire to be free, that stood with Israel and the Jewish people, that has literally spread the gospel around the world, has promoted and defended democracies, come to the aid of Europe 3 times in the last century, during the First World War, the Second World War, and also the Cold War, and is a representative was a representative of good in the world. Now, if the Americans turn away from their biblical foundations, then we can see that the world, and particularly the West, is turning more liberal. Then this has a damaging impact on the directions that our nations are heading in, and particularly the leaders that emerge from the political system have no biblical guidance, or certainly don't have any fear of God. And I think that is a scary thing for not only the United States, but for our nations and the West as a whole.
Definitely. A few years ago, I wrote in a project about how increasingly in my generation and in Generation Z, which will be now the primary makeup of the United States, the millennials will make up the vast majority now, that this idea of emotions guiding our morality is an incredible danger. People are led not by what is objectively real, because there's no sense of objective truth. Objective truth has been abandoned. The idea of objective morality has been completely thrown out the window. We've embraced moral relativity. We've embraced subjectivism to the degree that we decide a moral code based primarily on our feelings. The statistic that was given in that very pinpointed analysis by Gary Lane, 53% believe that emotions dictate morality. Okay, I'm angry. Well, do I kill you? Well, Jesus says, of course, if I'm angry without reason and speak you full to someone, I'm guilty of that in my heart. So that's a problem. But if I'm upset, does my emotion give me the ability to commit a violent crime against you? What's it to anyone else? If my emotion dictates morality, it doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't work in practice. It doesn't work before the government. It doesn't work in any way. So we have to return to the roots of healthy civilization. We have to recognize our civilizations are not healthy. Western civilization is sick. Why is it sick? Because by and large it's abandoned objective truth. It's abandoned this idea that there is something that is concretely moral, righteous, and just. And when we start getting back to that, when we start recognizing truth on both sides of the spectrum, because the left and the right can be both guilty of painting their own narratives, when we find what is truly righteous and just and get back to that according to God's word, then we will have a healthy society.
Excellent. So Reagan, obviously a pleasure to record Behind the Headlines with you, and thank you for your input, and thank you for watching at home. Whether President Trump can win the nomination to be the Republicans' nominee for president in 2024 is a long shot, but don't count him out. But I think what this wider reflects is there's something deeply wrong in our Western societies, in the United States, here in Britain, in Europe as well, because we taken Jesus out of our society. The church has failed to be the conscience of the nation and the state, which means that we're in perilous times, and that's why it's important to stay close to Jesus in these days. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Behind the Headlines.